I'm not saying this is a great recipe for any company. I'm just saying it was the right decision for Codesphere because the platform covers so many different aspects of the development lifecycle that it has to be a big problem to solve. If people see the problem and how Codesphere solves it for them, the rest is bureaucratic, both from the client side and from our side.
What's interesting then is if you're an enterprise and if you migrated into the cloud and then your bill really starts hurting, right? And you probably already have that talent also on your team because you've had it or you anyways want to have a top talent, right?
The whole marketing side of AWS is so huge that focusing on the companies that can migrate to cloud now but still want a similar experience for us is better. And I think that is also how we really harm these larger enterprises the most, because if you don't need to migrate and you can make it happen and you already had the scale, yes, you will pay less.
The Cloud Frontier podcast is brought to you by SimplyBlock. In this bi-weekly podcast, we explore cloud infrastructure startups, founder journeys, and discuss cutting-edge cloud technologies. Join us as we uncover the latest innovations shaping the future of cloud computing. Welcome everyone to another episode of Cloud Frontier podcast. Today we have Elias Schneider as a guest from Codesphere. Hi Elias, great to see you.
Hi Rob, great to see you. Thanks for inviting me.
Pleasure to have you. So Elias, I always start with the story of the guest. So please tell us a little bit more about yourself, about Codesphere, and about what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm Elias. I am the founder of Codesphere. Before Codesphere, I worked at Google in various different teams, and before that at SAP. And at Codesphere, we're bringing development to the cloud. What that means is we are building platform as a service, so to say, private cloud that you can install on your cloud provider or you can install on-prem. Many larger enterprises are doing it, and we standardize the development processes to the absolute best. And by that, move your whole team to a platform where they can code together and deploy together and just streamline the whole development process.
Right, that sounds exciting, and so how did you come up with that idea? Like, so you directly shifted from Google to basically starting a company.
Yes, we had systems at Google that I really liked. I think they were for much larger scale than what you need outside of it. But we had a system that basically handled all the deployment parts for you. We had systems that handled all the CI/CD parts for you. And when you were coding, you were actually not coding on your laptop. You were always coding directly in the cloud, which let you really leverage the cloud, which was the first time I had seen it. And as a developer, you could access the whole computational power of the data center. While looking at the whole process, you could self-service as a development team. That means you never had to ask a DevOps engineer to do something for you. You just did everything yourself because you could, but at the same time on a massive scale. Google has quite some users.
Right, and so essentially, in some way, you want to basically automate the DevOps part for the developer. Is that correct?
Yes. We want that the developer does their own setup themselves, be it the development process. And the development process, in my opinion, has many different parts, from doing writing local code to doing the review, continuous integration process, doing your testing, to QA, to actually finally releasing in production. And to set this up and get it in a really good state, we want developers to be able to do that themselves. While we also want developers to be able to set up the infrastructure as it is running later in production, also on a large scale, without having to fiddle around with Kubernetes, with VMware, with all the lower level software that is really not meant for engineers at all. That is really more of a data center operations tool. And today we abuse these tools for and let developers do work in them directly, which just often leads to huge overhead. Not that developers can't do it, but it leads to huge overhead that creates a lot of costs and makes people slow. Right.
So basically you help developers to focus on what they're best at, which is developing, right? Instead of figuring things out on the infrastructure layer and so on. And obviously we're going to talk a lot about your product, but maybe before that, so how did it come together, right? So like you were sort of, not frustrated, but you came up with this idea at Google, and then you just collect a couple of your close colleagues or people that you knew and went to start Codesphere because it's your first startup, right? So obviously that's always super interesting. Like how does it come along, and how has it been for you so far?
Yeah, so I actually just late in the night started texting friends that I knew from startups or tech and told them I'm gonna do this, and asked around who was gonna start this with me. I think, unexperienced and naive as I was looking at founding a startup, I was mainly asking people that I know are good engineers and good investors, and we started it very quickly. A few months later, and got funding very quickly. It was in the fundraising hype. We got the first $500,000 very quickly from investors that we already knew from a previous startup, and then basically quit Google. I had to work a few months longer, and
so you raised while at Google?
Yes.
Oh wow.
Yes. Quit Google and basically started working then a few months later when we left it.
Oh wow, that's quite a story. And I guess so. As you said, that was like 2020 or something like that. So when the times were.
Yes. So the first idea was in summer 2020, and then we officially founded early 2021, 16th January.
Okay. Oh wow, that's it's funny because Simplyblog actually got founded on the 17th of January. So yeah, I think we should celebrate company birthday together next year.
Yes, we basically just we started like doing a lot of work around it earlier. So I think unofficial founding date is summer 2020, and official one is January 2021.
Yeah, makes sense. And so you founded, right, and you raised $500,000, and basically what happened there, right? Because obviously I assume it takes quite a bit to deliver like an MVP of that product and sort of get an actual traction from enterprises, which I assume are eventually the customers for you. So how did you go about it?
Yeah, as you said, today we've raised well over $20 million, and we just raised our Series A last April. I think the whole time in between, in the beginning, I think I should have raised more, to be honest, because it took us just so long to find product market fit that money ran out in between multiple times, and we just managed, partially out of luck, partially out of, we actually had the convincing story. We had a good product that was coming. We had people believe in us, and that's how we could raise in between before we actually found product market fit. It took us, in my opinion, it took us around 3 years until we really realized a stronger pull. We tried a lot of different customer segments, from private users to e-commerce companies, startups, scale-ups, until we figured that is actually the largest enterprises that work best for us. And we didn't, it's so obvious, but we didn't realize it in the beginning that everything we're doing with fixing the development process, fixing the internal development platform, it's not a private user or startup problem to fix. It's actually, there is a lot of value. There's actually probably more value that you can create for larger companies than for smaller companies, because a startup is trying to find product market fit themselves. They don't care if they're building the best software, if the processes are the most streamlined, if it's scalable in any way, like people-wise, financially, process-wise, and compute-wise. But then if you're looking at a larger enterprise, that's exactly the problem they have. And they have it in a lot of teams all the time. So that is what really helped us. We had to adapt a bit on the feature side to these larger enterprises. For example, you can host Codesphere on-prem right now completely without even access to the internet, which is very rare in our field. So we have very little competition even in this area.
So like air-gapped environment completely.
Yes. Very little competition even in this area, and that is what made us really grow much faster, focusing on the companies that others don't really want to focus on today.
Right. Yeah. I mean, of course, and I think we had this little chat before the recording, and I think there is something that, like, when you're a really small startup, you sort of are fearing to go for the large enterprises right away. So was it also that in your case, that you were like, okay, we're too small, like we need to find another customer, that's why we need to try somewhere else? Or was it also a process that over time you just sort of became more ready to sell to enterprises?
Absolutely the first. I think if you would have known, we would have been able to do that much earlier. I'm not saying this is a great recipe for any company. I'm just saying it was the right decision for Codesphere because the platform covers so many different aspects of the development lifecycle that it has to be a complicated, it has to be a big problem to solve. And also because it's so important for the companies that use us. But yeah, everybody told us don't sell directly, don't go to large enterprises, focus on small users, otherwise you don't scale. And it just didn't work for us. That's so that was definitely, on the one hand, listening to others, and on the other hand, yeah, of course, no enterprise would work with a pre-seed company on this critical component. But over time, we grew as a company, we got better processes, and we got the trust of the first really large enterprises. And we continue to build it. Like, there's still a long road until any enterprise worldwide can say, okay, I'm going to use Codesphere over IBM without any additional factors like time pressure, for example, is really helpful today to convince that it's a good choice to go with a startup.
Yeah, absolutely. So for an enterprise, so where I mean, I imagine that obviously, like, bulk of the value that you bring is obviously sort of the efficiency on the developer side, which means probably you don't need to employ as many DevOps and infrastructure people, right? So you save sort of on the cost, you increase the sort of efficiency of the developer, right? So is that correct? And what else is out there that you sort of solve for the enterprises? So in other words, also, like, what are they doing today, and like how is it changing when they implement Codesphere?
I think for any enterprise, there are three larger challenges. And I'm not actually speaking about the challenges that are a prerequisite for it much, but there has to be a prerequisite challenge, which is it has regulatory challenges with going on public cloud, for example, or it's just using a lot of different infrastructures across the world that are getting difficult to manage. For example, a private equity company that has like 20 different teams that all have their different processes because they all were different companies just a year ago. These kinds of challenges, I think, need to be a prerequisite, not for leveraging the benefits of Codesphere, but for these companies to be able to work with us, because there needs to be time pressure either on a license or on a team setup, so that you say, okay, I'm going to take that startup that can make it happen in less than a month, whereas I'm going to work with, for example, IBM OpenShift that can make it happen, but it will take 2 to 4 years. And then this is really what helps us getting this initial trust that you need before we even go into their problems. And then once you get that initial trust, you can really start working on the challenges. And those are three major ones. One is the process that needs to be fixed. So the development process across all different teams, it needs to be very fast to get feedback. You want to implement shift left. By that I mean that you try to figure out bugs or if a feature really works before you even start coding on it, that you don't discover issues late, either in QA or in production, that you do everything in your power to discover them as early as possible. And yeah, get that well set up, standardize it across teams, provide a great developer experience so that developers don't have to learn Kubernetes or have to ask administrators. Then you have that's the process side. Then you have the production side. You have a production setup, you want to save costs, that needs to scale across multiple regions. It can also be really complex, and you basically need to work with third-party software, custom code, and also need to really understand when things break, meaning the monitoring, the APM side of it. And I think all three components are like the second larger pillar of the problem. how does software in production run and work, and how can I work with these architectures that benefit me but are very complicated to set up and host. And the third problem is really the infrastructure and migration side. Let's say you are a company that has 30 data centers in different countries all over the world, and all data centers look different. Some use VMware, some use Azure, some use nothing, some are bare metal, somewhere in the desert in Morocco. Then we actually have customers with that. And then you basically need to figure out how to deploy software on that on scale without really getting extremely slow. And that means that you need a way to consistently and successfully install, manage, maintain your infrastructure, and also make sure that you have just one deployment model for all different infrastructures that you have. And these are the 3 areas where Codesphere can help. So we can standardize and make it really fast and nice to work with your process. We can really save you costs on production hosting, and we can give you a very easy to maintain, scalable, monitored production environment. And then if you install on-prem, or if you have very hybrid setups, we can make that very easy for you and very scalable in that way. I think the 2 words that really summarize it is you want scalability and sovereignty.
Yeah, but that obviously sounds like a very large enterprise type of use case, right? And so within that enterprise, like, who is the person that realizes those problems, and who is the person that you have to talk to? Because it sounds like it needs to be someone really like higher up in the hierarchy, right? To really see that holistically.
Yes, I think we work with really anyone in the company. So it happens that we have 30 different points of contact in a customer, and that we talk to anyone from the developer to the team leads to the operations people to the security people, compliance people, to the CIOs, to the C-suite. And I think the more contacts you have there, and the more you can show people how you solve the problems, the particular problems for them, the better set up you are for success with your company. And of course, what drives us right now a lot is there was this Broadcom VMware acquisition. That's typically a C-suite topic that the license cost has propelled into infinity. Then the HashiCorp by IBM acquisition, then license phase out of different former Red Hat products. Then a lot of people wanting to move to the cloud because their data center leases run out. People who want to move back from the cloud to an on-prem solution because either new regulations or just exploding costs on the cloud provider. So there's all sorts of different drivers that get you there. And I think at this stage of Codesphere, we really come in as the problem solver. We have huge benefits. We have a new deployment technology that is faster, can save you costs, supports more complicated applications. We provide you with a great process for your development teams. We provide you with a great process for your infrastructure guys. But in the end, everything that counts as the first step is, can you actually help me migrate in the time that I have left before any big problem appears?
So generally your entry point is any kind of migration.
Often, yes, often. I think that the whole market sentiment is interesting right now because a lot of companies are confused on, should I now go on-prem to save costs versus AWS? What's the actual total cost of ownership of my infrastructure? And I think we are entering a new kind of phase in the market for cloud where it becomes way more sovereign, way more detailed, way more understanding which costs who in the company is creating. And I think we are entering kind of a new phase for cloud where people have way more awareness of what they have running.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And I'll come back to that in a second. I think just had one more question on the sales side, because if your sales process is so complex, right, and there's so many people sort of involved in using or touching product like Codesphere, like how do you sell, right? Is it like, who do you target? Do you really target like everyone that could fit your sort of user or decision maker profile? Do you have a lot of inbound? Do you rely mostly on outbound? Like that's always super interesting for any type of founders in cloud infra space.
I think after we had the first few companies, we are both growing within the companies as well as through recommendations. And I must say these are the biggest drivers right now. I don't want that. I want to change it. I can say how we acquired the first few CIOs, but then it's just that the amounts of onboardings with customers and the difficulty to do them really well made it so that the initial sell is not really a problem anymore right now. And we are trying to find out if that's a scalable approach, getting it from existing customers and network, or if we really need to do more outbound. When we did outbound and when we were successful with it, but that's already almost a year old, we did outbound really once for just a month basically. Is we try to find companies with over 300 million revenue that have SaaS products, that have their own infrastructure or run in the cloud, that look for DevOps engineers or machine learning engineers, where they have a new CIO that is there in between 1 and 3 years. And then we would connect to them on LinkedIn and try to connect with them through events and have that constant nurturing, have constant appearances of Codesphere in their daily lives, like with different ads, with different profiles that comment, with us being or sponsoring certain events. And that really got us to have them come to us. And when we saw even the slightest interaction, we just shortcutted the them coming to us. So we tried to figure out how often do they need to interact with Codesphere for them to really have the trust to start something with us. And it's just 2 times was a great indicator. And then 2 times where they actively interacted. I think the interactions in reality were probably way over 80 that you have, just based on the amounts of posts and events we were going to. And then we negotiated a POC, where in the beginning we didn't charge and it didn't work at all. And then later we started charging for a POC. That also we really need to do now that we know it, that we need to charge for POCs, but back then we did some for free as well. None of the customers that got a free POC converted. And up to this date, every customer that did a paid POC converted. And then you start a small POC that's typically a few 10,000 that you pay depending on the size of it. And it's typically a few weeks of testing Codesphere on their infrastructure, doing an installation, doing like courses and teachings for their team on how to use it and how to really make the most out of it. And if then multiple layers are convinced, that's typically a business manager, a technical decision maker, and the developers, then you can really go ahead and start working on a proper contract, which for us happens a few months later. This involves a lot of compliance. This involves a lot of contract work. Typically, these larger companies have complicated purchasing processes that you have to understand and follow. But it's not magic. So really everything I'm saying, I think, would scare almost any like early founder away. Like, oh, I have to go through purchasing, and purchasing can take a few months. I have to be compliant, and I have to do my certifications, and I have to answer the security questionnaire, which is 5,100 different questions on how I patch my Windows machines, and when was the last time I did reset and check that my Office router wasn't hacked, this kind of stuff. But the truth is, just work through it. It's not so true for us. It's just work through it. It's definitely worth the effort. And these customers are very loyal, very helpful, help you build the roadmap, are willing to pay for it. And I think for us, it has proven to be, therefore, despite the very complicated, expensive sales process, every customer costs us around 30,000 euros just to initially get them. But the ticket sizes also make that possible, that we have with these customers, that in the end, it's a very giving experience with them, as opposed to working with a smaller company that might not actually have the problem big enough. And I think we figured that out later than we should, but we did figure it out eventually.
Yeah, that's the most important thing. But indeed, it sounds like a lengthy process. But as you said, if it pays off at the end of the day, that's what makes it meaningful, right?
In the end, we get it done typically in 3 months, including all the compliance.
Okay, that's not bad.
And that involves some of the largest entities that exist, like government or private-wide in Germany.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you can get it done in 3 months with government in Germany, then it's really not bad.
Yeah, I think if people see the problem and how Codesphere solves it for them, then the rest is bureaucratic, both from the client side and from our side.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. Okay, so coming back to the topic we touched on earlier, so on-prem versus cloud or public cloud, right? Because everything is cloud today, right? I think that's one thing we can agree. So how do you see that evolving? So we already spoke about it, that you see a lot of like migrations like both ways, right? But yeah, where is the market today, and how do you see that evolving from the couple years ago?
Yeah, I think a couple of years ago, where cloud was still very new, everybody thought, okay, either I'm never moving to the cloud or there's no question I'm going there. And I think so many people are so locked in cloud providers that the cloud providers over the years have started capitalizing on it, and maybe a bit much, which drives this whole new notion of going back into on-prem, away from the cloud. I think while I agree that the cloud providers maybe squeezed on margins a bit much, I think that it's not a good idea to just move back to on-prem, because you will still have huge total cost of ownership because of all the people involved to get it done. I think we lately had a discussion on the LinkedIn post where we spoke about it, and I found that really interesting. Just for people listening in, the LinkedIn post basically said it compared running Kafka on VMs in AWS, and it compared running Kafka on VMs on Hetzner, a German on-prem data center provider, basically. And Hetzner is really cheap, also because they use older machines, and they even have a spot market for older machines, while AWS is not, and it's also not on the VMs. And I think what was on the post is that the costs of it are comparatively high, that VMs on the hyperscaler cost 50,000 for just running this Kafka instance that he was talking about, while he would spend 2,000 a month on, I don't know the exact number, but around 2,000 a month on Hetzner.
Yeah, like 20 times less or something like that.
I think that's very short-sighted, because on the one hand, managed services have a reason why they exist, and he's not even using them in AWS. He's just trying to use VMs. I think maybe they are quite expensive on AWS. I think they are, but
I mean, they're going to be more expensive as well, but not 20 times, right?
Yeah, I think the challenge with VMs on a hyperscaler is you really misunderstand the point of using a hyperscaler then, from my perspective, because then you can really just run on-prem. But what you should do when you use a hyperscaler is use their managed services, because they, in the end, have way less operational costs. You don't need the people to set it up. If you run your own Kafka instance on VMs, you need admins that know how to use Kafka. If you want 24/7 uptime, you need admins that manage your Kafka 24/7 in shifts. Then you need good SRE practices, good alerting practices. You actually need to do the updates on it. It will generate you constant work. And in the end, yes, it can be cheaper if you're working on a really large scale, but most companies don't have it. And I'm talking hundreds of racks where this really starts to make sense. And yeah, I think it's short-sighted unless you really buy the software and licenses to make it easy on-prem. But as I said, even if Codesphere runs on-prem, it's not a software for a startup. The license would likely be too expensive for you as a startup, while the whole data center operations, doing it yourself, you will either not do it well enough, which means everything can break and you will have costs on the opportunity side. Either you're too slow, or you're just not stable enough and you're not able to acquire customers or keep customers, or you spend the time to hire all these people and have them do it, and it will just be way more expensive than running some smaller Kafka instance on AWS.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really nailed it. I mean, it's apples to oranges, right? Like the sort of comparison, and I think, even a high level, if Hetzner was really like 25 times cheaper, 20 times cheaper for really the same thing, I mean, everyone would be on Hetzner. Like Hetzner would be bigger than AWS, right? At least in terms of usage, because like there's no free lunch, right? So there must be a reason Amazon charges more. And as I said, it's mostly because of the managed services and that sort of ease of usage of the cloud services. And I think for vast majority of companies, it makes sense, because vast majority of companies are mid-sized, right, or startups or scale-ups. But I think what's interesting then is, if you're an enterprise and if you migrated into the cloud, and then your bill really starts like hurting, right? And you probably already have that talent also on your team, right? Because you've had it, or you anyways want to have a top talent, right? So how do you react then? I think this is an interesting part. Like, do you go back? Do you try to get more out of the AWS? Do you do hybrid setup, right? Like, what happens then?
I love that. I think that's really, there was a report lately from AWS where they said they are not afraid of companies moving from AWS to on-prem. They're afraid of less companies moving from on-prem to AWS because they don't need to, because there's solutions coming up like Codesphere is one that can really provide them the actual cloud experience without any access to the internet. And of course, we're not happy with just being like a copy of AWS on your data center. We really want to we want to provide a better experience long term. We want to make a development faster. We want to really leverage the new technologies that have happened in the last 15 years when it existed. And that will eventually give us a hold on the broader market as well as Codesphere. Just the whole marketing side of AWS is so huge that focusing on the companies that can migrate to cloud now but still want a similar experience for us is better. And I think that is also how we really harm these larger enterprises the most, because if you don't need to migrate and you can make it happen and you already had the scale, yes, you will pay less because you pay a more or less fixed fee versus paying per machine hours. I think eventually probably all companies that really have high loads should run a hybrid approach, and they should not rely on too many managed services as well. Doesn't mean that they need to be able to go fully out of the cloud, but they should be able to run workloads on-prem if they're regulated, because they can sometimes just be faster than going around the regulation. If they have fluctuating load, they should cover a cheap way for base load, which is typically something like Hetzner, or a co-location where you even lease machines and put them into some other person's data center, and then connect that through some third-party software to a cloud provider where you can scale up and down very quickly and react to load problems. And yeah, why I think like that is I think cloud providers have feature-wise and product-wise in the last few years really become very polluted. And having a smaller solution that helps the developers really focus on what's necessary and not what this X product does and the next product does and how to connect them and how to work with them. It has become a full profession to know how to operate AWS.
Right. I mean, it is. I think it's very clear. And like, I think this is exactly a bit of the challenge that clouds bring. That like you have like single service for everything. This sort of like, it's really driven through this like microservices architecture kind of thinking, right? And even for storage, like we obviously deal with storage, and actually that's a problem we solve, right? That like, if on AWS you want to like run a database, you have sort of like, you want to leverage S3 for low cost and reliability, but you also want probably NVMe disk for really like low latency type of reads or writes, right? And then maybe you want EBS for some sort of combination of that, but then those are already three services, right? If you want file system, it's another. If you want like really cold storage like Glacier, that's another service. So orchestrating that already is like, yeah, it's a business opportunity, and that's what we're seizing. But at the same time, for like an average business, it's like, yeah, you already probably have to have a couple people with like deep understanding of how those services go together, right? And this is just storage, right? That's not even touching on Kubernetes. That's not even touching on, on AI stuff or ML or Kafka or whatnot, right? I mean, AWS has 200 services, right? And they're starting to depreciate some of them because it's just a lot to handle, right? For them and for the users.
Totally. I think being sovereign is a good thing that you as an enterprise need to have. Do you need it as a startup already? I don't think so. Do you need to? I think it always depends on your company, right? If you're a large enterprise, you already have data centers, you maybe want to leverage cloud for your peaks, so you don't need to overspend on infrastructure that you have in your data center. Because if you need them only for 5 minutes or only on Black Friday, if you're an e-commerce company, then why would you have them all the time? But at the same time, use managed services, use more general managed services. That means, of course, there's a danger of being locked in to the cloud providers if you use very specific ones. And really try to get the most out of all the different systems that you have. And I think there's no clear winner really, because on-prem is very operationally difficult. You have these things that you need to order machines, so it cannot really easily scale up and down. Maybe the way you manage your data center gets deprecated by some new regulation. Like there's a lot of banks that had data centers and they were told, okay, it's not a tier 4 data center, so you can't use it anymore. So these kinds of dangers exist for on-prem, and you need to weigh them in, and server costs as well. While if you are on cloud only, you have the challenge that you might be very locked in and you might be paying way too much for some of the services. And you basically cannot save costs on that larger scale, and then it can really quickly get ridiculous on the price. So I think larger enterprises, hybrid is really the way to go. Hybrid and multi-cloud, and hybrid in between on-prem and public, and probably even multi-cloud on the public side. While for smaller companies, I would use as much managed as possible. Just get something out that works, and it can be Firebase if you want to, or like any sort of small service until you have people paying for it and until it doesn't scale anymore. Just the general notion of we should all move back because hyperscalers are so expensive. I think it's a wrong one. And it will backfire to the companies that did.
I absolutely agree on this. There's been obviously those famous repatriation cases where like some of the very famous businesses like went back to on-prem and showed all those calculations. But again, it's never apples to oranges. And I think public cloud like AWS, it's got its value and it's here to stay, right? I think that's clear. So I think the thinking should be, as you said, it's like, what are the best things about public cloud and how does it fit into our current, business priorities and how can we leverage that? And then what's good out there else outside of the public cloud, right? To mitigate risk, to sort of get better ROI on certain really heavy workloads, right? And, also what are the technologies out there that really let me build my own cloud outside of public cloud, right? Because I think that's also where solutions like Codesphere come in.
Totally agree.
So typically I have like those two closing questions. So, one thing is, what is the most valuable resource about, next gen cloud infrastructure that you sort of typically resort to when you sort of, want to get some inspiration or you want to, change the perception of where the market's going to go? It can be a person, book, podcast, blog, tweet. What is it typically like? Where do you get your knowledge about the space from?
Well, I think that's an incredibly difficult question because there's just so much noise out there and so many different articles. I really follow news on Heise and on other tech publications. I'm in different communities on social media like LinkedIn and Twitter and just see what's happening there. I love following Reddit, especially on the AI space. I love following, for example, the Reddit channel Local Llama. But answering this with one publication is super difficult.
So, the very last question, like what's the most exciting thing out there that you see happening in the broader cloud infra space?
I'm super excited by RISC-V. What RISC-V is, it's a new type of chip architecture that is an evolution of the former RISC architectures. For example, ARM and NVIDIA are famously based off RISC-free. And there's a new one, it's open source. That together with a few new patents that actually came out of China that allow building chips on a very high quality, even in your, by kind of a brute force method, even in your garage, basically, I think will enable a new revolution on the chip side, which is, to me, today the most exciting part, that we go away from these like heavy lift license-wise problematic Intel, AMD, ARM, NVIDIA, and stronger and more go into the direction of having many different, very specialized chips from many different companies. And it's of course less profitable to build chips on a smaller scale, but at the same time, you can do this now as a company. You don't need ASML today anymore. You can build your own chips. And I think that once that picks up, this is going to be, in my opinion, the next larger revolution in computing.
That's something to definitely follow. All right, Elias, I think that was really good. Anything you want to share with the audience before we drop off?
I really like what's happening right now in the market. I think just don't switch to on-prem the next day only because you hear it in the news, but I think that goes for everything. And thanks for taking the time to talk to me. I found it a very exciting chat.
Thank you very much, and all the best building. Cloud Frontier is brought to you by SimplyBlock, an intelligent database storage orchestrator. Get more IAPS and lower latency for your databases in the cloud. Visit our website at simplyblock.io for more information.